This conversation is brought to you with the kind compliments of CALL, that is, the Commonwealth of Learning. Gender inequality must be eradicated, and CALL is on a mission to help in its obliteration. It has embarked on a project to help young women and girls become motivated to pursue their fields of interest and build the future generation of leaders by launching the Commonwealth Wise Women Project. This is a mentoring program that links girls from across the Commonwealth with mentors also from across the Commonwealth who are women in leadership roles with a story deserving of emulation. But CALL does not stop there. CALL is now taking that initiative further by creating this podcast series where I get the opportunity and privilege to interview some of these distinguished women and hear the path they took or the path that took them to leadership. COVID-19 has joined the long list of contributors to gender inequality, including globalization, technology, and climate change. But stay with us through this 10-episode series and hear how women have made their way over and around these hurdles. I am Dr. Ann Wallace, a higher education management and e-learning specialist, and I will be your host. Today's episode is titled, You're a Leader When Those You Lead Benefit from Your Actions, by Professor Asha Kanwar. Welcome, Professor Khanwar.
Thank you, Anne.
I would like to introduce our audience to you by reading from your bio. So please allow me to start with your bio. Professor Asha Kanwar, one of the world's leading advocates of learning for sustainable development, is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Commonwealth of Learning. Throughout a career spanning over 35 years, she has made outstanding contributions in the areas of teaching, research, and international development. Professor Khanwar received her undergraduate master's and MPhil degrees from the Punjab University in India and a DPhil from the University of Sussex in the UK. Her areas of expertise include open, distance, and technology-enabled learning, open educational resources, quality assurance, and gender and organizational development. Professor Khanwar has written and edited over 12 books, published more than 100 papers and articles, and delivered numerous keynotes at prestigious international conferences. Prior to joining CALL, Professor Khanwar was a senior consultant in open and distance learning at UNESCO's Regional Office for Education in Africa. She has also served as Director, School of Humanities, and as Pro-Vice Chancellor at the Indira Gandhi National Open University in New Delhi, India. She was a Fulbright Fellow for postdoctoral research at Iowa State University in the US, where she was later invited to teach. Currently, she serves on the boards of several organizations, including the governing board of the UNESCO Institute for Information Technologies and Education. Professor Khanwar, you're a very busy lady, and so we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. I'd like us to start by you. Although I have read your bio, I would like to start by you telling us in your words what you do.
I have the privilege of serving the Commonwealth of Learning, which is a wonderful Commonwealth organization, which brings learning for sustainable development to more than 47 member states across the different regions of the world. And we use distance learning and technologies. And I think the people we serve are usually the last persons in the queue, the most remote, marginalized, vulnerable communities. And this also includes women and girls. So we try to use technologies which are appropriate and affordable so that we leave no one behind. So that's in a nutshell what I'm doing at the moment with my colleagues.
Thank you very much. That's a nutshell, but a very full nutshell. I know that your early education and work were in India, a culturally rich country. So I would like you to please tell us what it was like for you as a young girl, cognizant of the culture, pursuing education in India.
Well, I was a young girl several decades ago. So things were very different. At that time, it was very clear that, especially in my community and in my family, that the ultimate destination for girls is marriage. Yes, they did give us an education, but it was the boys, we somehow felt that they were preferred. There was more investment being made in them and they were being groomed for future jobs. Whereas for girls, uh, it somehow sometimes even seemed a bit of a kind of, that we were a liability because our parents had to look for dowries to get us married, look for people, because those days there were arranged marriages to marry us. So it was a bit of a feeling of being at a disadvantage. But yes, we did get education. And that really, made a fundamental difference, even though culturally we had to abide by those norms and get married very young.
Okay, thank you. So you pretty much understood your place, so to speak, in the culture, but that didn't hinder you from being developed. What would you say was the defining moment that pointed you to this life of leadership?
Well, I mean, there was no moment as such for when I said, oh, I've become a leader, but the kind of sense of responsibility came fairly early on. My father was looking after a big family. He was the only breadwinner. And he had a heart attack, and I was the eldest girl, maybe 14 years old or something in the family. And I felt responsible, somehow after that. And that's the kind of moment, when you see my brothers were younger. So I felt that, I had to be responsible if anything happened.
Okay, great. So leadership started early, whether you were aware of it, fully aware of it or not. And so at what stage then would you say you became sensitized to gender inequality?
I think as far as I can remember, that I knew that things were unequal. I didn't really understand that they were bad. It just seemed to be something which was there and which, as small children, you accepted. And then later on, as you sort of grew and maybe in your teen years, we begin to understand that, this doesn't seem fair. How is it that these boys are getting everything, when I want some things as well? So that's when it began to this thing. And that's when we started talking about it. It did make a difference, actually, to talk about it and to protest, really.
Okay.
The protest was to the parents.
To the parents, yes, of course. Well, what you said to us so far is that clearly culture is a positive thing in that it does help the development of young people and development of girls. But I think we're all aware that across the Commonwealth and perhaps across the world, there's still areas where the cultural mores are injurious to girls. And by that, I mean girls are not allowed to get an education. Some girls are even made to get married very young and take on the responsibilities of marriage. They are even still children themselves. If you had an opportunity to speak to the parents of girls or the governors of such practices or to the girls themselves, what would you say to them to help change the situation while at the same time we are not at all disparaging the culture?
Today there are many more opportunities than we had when we were growing up. There's much more awareness. The communities, the parents are much more aware of the value of education. And that is fundamental. And let me give you an example of this young woman from Bangladesh. She's 22 years old. She was married as I think at the age of 14. And child early and forced marriage is still prevalent in many Commonwealth countries. In fact, Bangladesh is one of them. Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Mozambique, Tanzania, where girls are married and forced into early marriage. So at the age of 22, she already had 3 children. And these children started going to school. And they asked the mother, can you help us with homework? And she couldn't. So she decided to do something about it. And she went to enroll herself in an open school to resume the education which had to be, truncated when she got married at a very early age. And now today she's feeling very empowered because she can help her children with their homework and she's enjoying reading. So I think there are opportunities. We shouldn't give up.
Okay.
Let us not lose hope. Even if we have had those kinds of experiences, life is very long.
Yes.
And we have to not give up at any stage. We keep trying and we will succeed.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's very uplifting to hear the story of that lady and the perspective that you have on this. It has been said that men dominate women through the advocacy of women. And this tends to happen, it appears, in the organization. How would you advise young women who are just entering the world of work to guard themselves against unwittingly playing the role of female oppressor?
Well, I think first, women who are entering a new job have to prove themselves twice as much as young men who are entering the job. So I think the first thing is to build their competence, to build their professional skills, to learn, to keep an open mind. I think that is fundamental. Because every time you'll have to, you're always being tested and you will have to be fully aware of that. And we have to succeed in that test. And that can only be by developing ourselves on an ongoing basis. There's no time to rest on laurels or anything like that. Yes. The second is, yes, we are living in a patriarchal society. We do, internalize the norms of the environment around us. We are conditioned by various societal norms and so on. And we do think, like, for example, people say, oh, these women drivers, where's that coming from? I mean, these are those kinds of, stereotypical prejudices that we have. We've internalized. So the point is to keep reflecting and addressing those so that, we don't continue those stereotypical kind of thinking going forward. And that's the only way we will not become oppressors. Otherwise, we could become as well.
We could be as well. Yes, indeed. And I'm aware that there is a thought that women who enter the world of work and who are seeking to rise to leadership positions feel that in order to be effective, in order for them to be heard or recognized as leaders, they have to behave like men do in all its permutations. Do you subscribe to that thought?
I don't think we have to be like anybody else. The main thing is to be yourself and be true to yourself. That's the fundamental thing, true to your values, true to your commitments. And of course, build your professional competence. That is really fundamental.
Yes, great values.
Not to be like anybody. We have to be ourselves.
We have to be ourselves, and we have to establish and recognize our own values and be true to them. I appreciate you saying that. We'll be right back after this short break. The Pathway to Female Leadership is brought to you with the kind compliments of the Commonwealth Wise Woman Project. COVID-19 has negatively affected many students in learning environments. And I'm aware of this because right here in the Caribbean, I know that there have been reports of many students who have made a decision not to return to the learning environment. They've decided that they're going to go to work and whatever form that work takes. But the thing is that education has an ecosystem. And you, Professor Khanwar, you have called for the recalibration of the educational system. This, of course, takes time and it takes money. And because we don't have money, it's going to take us a lot of time. Could you suggest to young women and girls how to leverage the aspects of the education ecosystem that are within their own reach, that would help them to be educated, albeit not in what is seen as a formal education.
You know, one of the things of the pandemic, one of the silver linings has been the global acceptance of online learning. Mm-hmm. And even though, I mean, and of course, the Caribbean is very well, has good connectivity compared to the rest of the Commonwealth, you know, if you compare it to the other regions of the Commonwealth. Most people do have phones. They may not have computers or laptops, but they do have phones. So there is a whole world which has opened up because of technology availability and, you know, the lower costs of technology today than they were before. At the same time, during this pandemic, a lot of people have started offering online courses. In fact, Coursera offered a workforce recovery program, and CALL joined hands with Coursera. Mm-hmm. And they gave us 150,000 licenses, which we gave to people around the Commonwealth. And even if in cases, you know, in countries like Ghana, where everybody was not well connected and connectivity was a little high, data was expensive, they went to library facilities to access those online courses. They used WhatsApp, they used their mobile devices, but they continued to learn, mm-hmm. you know, from some of the top universities. Mm-hmm. So now the facilities are there, and some of these are free online facilities. Mm-hmm. We do have, even if it's a smartphone, sometimes even basic phones are quite helpful in accessing education, especially, you know, if it's grassroots communities, because we are dealing with farmers and we are reaching them through their basic mobile phones. Mm-hmm. So I think learning is possible along the whole lifelong learning spectrum. You know, you can continue to learn. It doesn't have to be within the confines of a classroom. It can be outside. It can be formal, non-formal, informal. But I think learning must continue. Mm-hmm. And girls who are probably more impacted because of the crisis and more likely not to return to school in many countries because of the impact of this crisis, can continue to learn. And they must, in fact. They must.
I thank you for that. And I'm hoping that our girls will hear that education is there to be had. It's actually at their fingertips if they just look around at what is going on. As CEO of an institution such as the Commonwealth of Learning, it means that you are responsible for interacting, well, doing a lot of things, as you've already said, but for interacting with men and women from across multiple cultures and multiple states and so on. Usually, when one hears about this, one immediately thinks it's a job for a man. So for that reason, I have a two-part question for you. Do you encounter challenges from males in this role? And the second part is, are women supportive of you in this role?
You know, one is that in some cultures, men still tend to associate authority with other men. So they tend to sort of overlook you in that sense. I remember still a meeting, you know, when as a pro-vice chancellor from IGNU, I had gone with a younger colleague to a ministry meeting. The official kept talking to him rather than to me when I'm the one who came with the proposal. So, you know, those kinds of things we do encounter. But if you are competent, if you know what you're doing, and if you approach everyone across cultures with a kind of sense of humility and respect, I think you get it back in ample measure. So I don't think there's any problem with men or women. We have very good networks. Of course, little challenges can happen from time to time. But in general, the networks, you know, which we've nurtured over the years are very supportive. Mm-hmm. And in fact, CALL enjoys, and because of CALL, all the people who work for CALL enjoy a lot of social capital across the Commonwealth. So So in general, no, we don't. At least I haven't faced too many difficulties which were insurmountable.
That's great. You haven't faced and you haven't registered them. And that is a wonderful approach to have to these realities. Here in the 21st century, we are facing a lot of social and economic challenges. And I want to look at the concept of turning challenges into opportunities, with climate change being one of those challenges. Do you see a role for young women in areas related to climate change and mitigation and so on?
No, in fact, girls and women are more likely to be more adversely impacted by climate change than anybody else. In fact, they say that about 12.5 million girls will not return to school every year after this crisis. So what are we going to do? I mean, alternative ways like open schools, etc., are one option. But I think girls need to develop the knowledge, skills, and values to address the issues which are emerging due to this climate change. And the knowledge and skills is fine, because knowledge will help them understand what it's all about, the skills to deal with challenges related to livelihoods. But values is very important, because they can have a multiplier effect. And how you have those values and change your behavior has an impact on the family and in the community, like, conserving resources, not wasting things, and then, educating other people as well. So I think women and girls do have a role to play. But again, then, it goes back to the role of education.
Yes. Yes. Clearly, Professor Khanwar, it is obvious that education is the mainstay for everything that we have to do. And whilst we are faced with a lot of negative situations, poverty being one of them, I think you have given our girls a lot to think about, ways that they can actually help themselves and how much of it is more at their fingertips than they realize. Professor Khanwar, the Commonwealth and the world have benefited a lot from you. What should we expect next?
One of the big priorities for me particularly is the education of women and girls, inskilling them for livelihoods. Mm-hmm. And that is very important. So these are two streams. One is education, which takes time before you can see the fruits of it.
Yes.
Skills development is something which we are being able to do in much shorter time frames, 6 months, 1 year. And we have this Girls Inspire program where we train girls in grassroots communities in technical skills, in life skills, which talks about their human rights, and in financial literacy, so that they know how to deal with the business, etc. So once these girls are skilled, we also link them either with a financial institution or with an employers association to open the doors for livelihoods. So that could be either employment or entrepreneurship. So these girls can get a little bit of seed money, start a bakery or a small computer, mobile repair establishment or something like that. And many girls have benefited. Thousands of girls have benefited from this program. And you can see the results fairly quickly, in 6 months to 1 year. So I think one of the priorities is going to be to continue the stream of training women and girls, training them and providing them with the opportunities where they could actually access livelihoods. And it's easier for CALL to do that. The second, I think, thing to expect is that in the past, there have been men leaders, there have been very few women leaders. So in the future, because women are looking for other women role models, okay, there is a generation, but that generation isn't going to be there forever. So we need to train the second and the third generation of leaders. And those girls are leaders in their various spheres or whatever they are doing. They don't need a badge or a label to say that, okay, now you are the CEO of an organization. You can be a leader when you exert an influence within your little sphere, however small that may be. So I think that cadre of leaders we want to develop. And, leaders who will keep changing. Today I'm a leader, tomorrow somebody else will be. But, we have to keep sort of creating and replenishing that pool of leaders. And especially for young girls, who are our future, the future of the Commonwealth tomorrow.
Thank you. I believe that the young girls and women, especially in the Commonwealth, have a champion in you, Professor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Today, we have been talking with the President and CEO of the Commonwealth of Learning, Professor Asha Kanwar, an outstanding leader and a very wise woman of the Commonwealth. On behalf of the Commonwealth of Learning Wise Women Project, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. Tune in for our next episode when we have another dynamic female leader from across the Commonwealth. I am Dr. Ann Wallace, signing off until the next time.